Welcome to the DeFinity Market Strategy. I'm Paul Rodriguez of ThinkTrading.com, and I'm here with Manu Choudhary, who's the CEO of DMA Link and the co-founder of DeFinity. Hi Manu, how are you this week?
Hey Paul, not too bad. How are you keeping?
Yeah, very good, thank you. Very good. So, Russia are banning Bitcoin, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, apparently they are, but I don't know. I don't know whether this is true or not. I think given the current political environment, we probably have some other issues to worry about with Russia, not necessarily regarding crypto. But I'll go on to that. But just first and foremost, just on Bitcoin, interestingly, so there is a company that's listed on the NASDAQ called BTCS, and they announced earlier this month that they were going to pay the world's first dividend in Bitcoin. I think they called it a dividend, which might just be a marketing thing. Yeah, which is interesting. So
that's cool.
But if you do the maths, you've got to own quite a lot of their stocks. I think their stock trades about $4.50 per share. They're giving, I think the next quarterly dividend is going to be $0.05. So you're not going to get much Bitcoin. So you have the option. You can either choose to receive Bitcoin or you can receive fiat US dollars if you wish. But it's the principle. Now, obviously, BTCS is a blockchain company, so I guess it's not that surprising, but they are the first people in the world to do it. And I think it's quite interesting that they've done this. So are we going to see more people or more listed companies pay dividends in crypto? I certainly hope so. I think this could be the beginning of an interesting trend. And I guess if anything, it's going to create awareness and hopefully scale adoption. So I think that's very positive from that perspective.
Yeah, brilliant. Very interesting.
But also the other thing I was going to say was so obviously El Salvador piled into Bitcoin in a big way. They made it legal tender last year. Yesterday or the day before yesterday, actually, it was announced by the financial powerhouse of Tonga in the Pacific that they are considering making Bitcoin legal tender. Now, the reality is this really a big deal? Well, it is because it's another country. But I think if you look at it on a GDP basis, it's kind of relevant, but not very. I think the last time I looked, GDP figures, if you believe these numbers, for Tonga were about $500 million. $500 million for FYE 2021. Okay. So compare that to El Salvador, which was I think 26 billion. It's good, but it's not amazing. Now, what's really interesting is that if you look at the infrastructure in El Salvador, there's a company called Strike that's essentially set that up, and they run the entire payment network via the Lightning Network. Now, they made an announcement recently. Now, and look, we all know that Latin American countries clearly, historically, have had issues with inflation, as have all EM countries, quite frankly. But again, I guess certainly more recently, they've been more subject to these issues. And they basically said that they were entering Argentina, which is interesting.
Wow.
Now, Argentina, last time I checked, and again, it depends on what conversion rate you use for the Argentinian peso. It's somewhere between 400 and 500 billion. Figures of currencies just, shall we say, ain't what it used to be. But anyway, let's pretend it's $500 billion. Sorry, $500 billion even. That's actually quite a big deal. That's actually quite a big economy. Yeah. The only weird thing about what they're doing is that it's not going to be Bitcoin. It's not going to use the Lightning Network. It's going to be USDT running on the Ethereum network, which I don't really understand. So anyway, irrespective of the nuances of my own concerns about how this is actually going to work in practicality, it's probably one step removed from making it legal tender. So again, just to reiterate, they haven't said, the Argentinian government have not come out and said they're going to make USDT or crypto legal tender. But what seems to be happening is the same people that built the infrastructure for the payment gateway in El Salvador, namely Strike, are setting up the same infrastructure in Argentina. So maybe this is a prelude to what's coming. I don't know. But I also understand that Brazil might be next to jump in, which is a much bigger economy as well. So it looks as though the wheels are in motion for, I wouldn't say mass adoption, but I think certainly a reasonable amount of adoption in Latin America, which I think is phenomenal. And again, less reliance on the US dollar, and again, a good hedge against inflation.
Wouldn't it be fair to say that do they necessarily need to make it legal tender, or could it just be that they don't ban it or don't try and stop it? So if people want to adopt it, and they probably are adopting it, isn't that enough?
Yes and no. Okay, so look, there's a reason why you want to make it legal tender, and the reason is this. Obviously, EM countries historically have taken money from people like the World Bank, the IMF. If you make crypto legal tender, you can repay those loans in your legal tender.
Right.
so you can repay the loans. So again, think about it like this: if you
Yeah.
have a currency that's not exactly the most stable, that's not exactly the most valuable, that kind of is having, unlike our developed nations here, where inflation apparently in the United States is 7%. I can tell you this much: I guarantee it's more like 20%. The UK guarantees more like 15%. So obviously they have big issues with inflation. So it's going to be easier for them, particularly in El Salvador, for instance, when they get their volcano mining rigs up and running, to repay whatever liabilities they have. And I think last time I checked, I think they only have about $1.5 billion of debt from the IMF, which they could probably pay back in about 18 months. So that, I think, is the real reason for making it legal tender. It gives you a lot more flexibility,
Yes.
and it basically it puts the power and control back into your hands. You can't be bullied by people like the World Bank and the IMF. And I think that's why it's so powerful.
Yeah, brilliant. But just a strange reason why they might be using Ethereum and USDT as opposed to Bitcoin. But
I honestly, I don't fully understand this. I'm not. Look, maybe this is just the first preamble into what they're actually planning on doing. But yeah, look, I think it's irrespective. It is progress nonetheless.
yes, definitely.
Maybe they don't know about gas fees. I don't know.
Yes, that's true. They might rethink it when they've seen the gas fees. Brilliant.
They might do. And then the only other thing I was going to say, which is kind of good and bad news, is again, as I'm sure I've probably said quite a few times, I'm a big fan of Charles Hoskinson. I'm a big fan of Cardano. Unfortunately, it hasn't done a huge amount since they launched the Alonzo smart contract. So that was back in September of last year. And effectively, what they did was they took all they were testing with dApps, but everything was private. So they were kind of testing the infrastructure, they're testing the stability, the robustness. And then yesterday, they went live with their first public dApp, which was Sunday Swap. And it kind of went okay. And that's why we saw the move in Cardano over the last couple of weeks from kind of, 79, 80 cents to 162, although it's obviously come off given what happened yesterday. But yeah, so the launch was good. They had a couple of teething problems. There's a lot of complaints of people saying transactions were failing. But again, as we kind of discussed last week, what happens with a lot of these layer one blockchains is, unfortunately, when you have an exponential increase in volume, which obviously you have, because you go from having the square root of bugger all users to having quite a lot of users, you have degrees of degradation. So is it that surprising? Not really. I mean, I don't think anyone should have been surprised. But as far as I can tell, transactions were eventually done. So there were delays, but they completed. So I think this is positive, and I think this is good news. And again, as I kind of said previously, I think this year could be a really big year for Cardano. Well, certainly I hope it is.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a big year for all of the cryptocurrency space, to be fair. But yes, it's interesting that these technologies are maturing. They've got to go through these periods of testing and breaking, and we'll see how it pans out. Brilliant.
No,
so
definitely.
so was that all in the news, or was there anything else?
There was. Sorry, just coming back to your point about Russia banning Bitcoin. I mean, you seem to hear one thing from certain government agencies, and you seem to hear another thing from Vladimir Putin. The way Putin was speaking about Bitcoin and crypto, I get the impression that they will at some point very soon be embracing this in a big way.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure. I think this is maybe just a bit of fud. I'd probably take it with a pinch of salt. What's more worrying and what's more alarming about the Russian situation now is, if you look at a lot of the rhetoric coming out of the United States, I read an article on Politico, not that I read Politico, I just happen to have it there, about a imminent attack on Ukraine by the Russians. Do you know who wrote the article?
Right, no.
Lockheed Martin.
Oh my God, right, okay.
Because there's no conflict of interest here.
No,
I mean, are you kidding me? Seriously, how is this allowed? So you're a defense company? Yes. You make money from war? Yes. Or the fear of war? And you think there might be a war? Yes.
Yes.
Are you serious? I honestly, I don't know what to say. I really don't know what to say. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry when I saw the headline. I was just like, seriously? Lockheed Martin?
Yeah. Yeah, very strange indeed.
Anyway,
so maybe the Russians are just trying to get the Bitcoin price down so they can buy a truckload and then,
buy the dip. Yeah, maybe that is exactly what they're doing. Honestly, I think that probably is highly likely. They're a bunch of very smart chaps. So who knows?
Indeed. So should we go over to the markets then and have a look at what's going on? Yeah, brilliant. Okay. So if we start off with the equity markets this week, because I think it's important to see what's going on in terms of this potential correction. So the S&P, we got this double top. We talked about a top way back, what was it, August time. We had this small double top, which triggered this correction. I've left this line in and talked about it many times. And the reason for that is when you see a reversal pattern fail, it can often go into a larger degree reversal pattern, which is potentially what's happening now. So we've got this double top here, but this could be part of a major pattern. So it's not guaranteed. It's still in the early stages, so we're going to take it one step at a time. But everything's looking a little bit heavy, especially with yields rising. So I'd be keeping an eye on a correction, maybe down to this level here at, like, 43. What have we got here? 43, sort of 58, 60. And then this could turn into a big head and shoulders pattern for a major correction. But we'll go one step at a time. For sure, the NASDAQ has been the one that's been leading the way to the upside, and it's also seems to be leading the way to the downside. And I put it in the weekly because it completed the top. If you look at this top here, and then we just jump back, you can see how the NASDAQ is leading the way down, because this is the equivalent pattern here. It's already gone through it here. So the NASDAQ is actually weaker, and that's a big, sea change, because it was never like that before. The NASDAQ was always leading the way up. So the fact that technology stocks are coming down, maybe it's because people think it's the end of the pandemic and people will be going back to offices and not watching Netflix all day or stuff like that. I don't know, but it's certainly a possibility. Now we've got the long-term moving average coming in here, which should act as support. So we will be watching this. But I also put in the weekly the Russell 2000, because with it being smaller cap stocks, it's extremely important to see how they're doing. And as you can see immediately, from when I put it in yesterday, it's already gone down quite a lot. So this was a big level that it broke. And that's not looking particularly great. And if there's ever going to be any pressure in the economy, it's usually the smaller cap stocks that take the hit. So equity-wise, this kind of leads into where interest rates might go, because if this continues downwards, it's what we were talking about last week, Manu, when we said, the Fed are going to raise interest rates, but really how many times are they actually going to raise interest rates? Because there is a potential for the market to start to go down. As soon as it does, they'll be reversing their view. So when it comes to the yield markets, if we look at the 10-year yields, we were looking for this 1.774 level, which it broke out through, and we were going for the next target at 1.949, which is near the psychological 2 level. And if that breaks, we've got resistance up at 2.5. Now, this is a big area, and I think a consolidation here would not be unwarranted. It's moved a long way. I think the market knows that thinks that rates are going up. The dollar has strengthened to a certain extent. It's been a bit patchy, but it has strengthened. And equities are starting to fall. So I think the path is still upwards, but I think we got to take this one step at a time. If 1.949 breaks, that is a big level, and I wouldn't rule out a fast move to the upside. But I think in the very short term, week on week, we could probably do with a consolidation. So in terms of the US dollar, which obviously is driving a lot of the moves in potentially in other assets. So as the dollar goes up, it's a tightening of interest rates in the US. It could be also putting a bit of pressure on the cryptocurrencies, potentially. Last week, we looked at this level here, this area here, as a corrective point where the market should bounce. Broadly speaking, I'm still bullish on the dollar. I think the dollar will go higher. And my kind of final target is around this level here, which is a Fibonacci target. So 97.72 is where I think it will potentially end. And then if the dollar starts to weaken from there, we get the crypto rally. So it's possibly why we're not seeing the crypto rally happening now, because the dollar's got one last leg in it. But we will see. We'll take it one step at a time. Now, I said last week that I thought the dollar had potentially... Sorry, I thought that Bitcoin and Ethereum had potentially based, at least from a short-term perspective, and I was willing to sort of stick my neck out and say, well, this was a significant low, and it would probably have a go at breaking this resistance line. But as you can see, it wasn't to be. So it was a very small rebound that we got intra-week. And actually, it's typical that when I write the weekly, the next day we get a really big move. That seems to happen all the time. So when I'm looking at it thinking, will that level break? Is it approaching it? Will it take it out? And then the next day it does. So it's kind of like the timing of when the markets decide to move seems to be on a Thursday. But in any case, it was a fairly decent short-term bounce for the short-term traders at this level here, which was basically 39,600. But in any case, well, we're below this resistance line and below 54,000. We are uber cautious on all the cryptocurrencies. And I still think we're trying to find the low. Well, we are trying to find the low. The market has gone down by 42%. Its last decline was 55%. And at some point, we're going to hit a really decent low, and then the market's going to consolidate. So the next target for me is this 36,300. So it could hit it this week. I'm not sure, but it could. I mean, it's pretty volatile. So that's the next level where I would, stick a bid in and see if it holds. Obviously, if it breaks, we're going lower again, but that's a really decent Fibonacci support. So I'm willing to, use that as a buy point just to see if we can get a bounce out of it. But there's still a lot of work for it to do before we can get broadly bullish, and this dollar move still needs to punch itself out. Same deal with Ethereum. This rebound was very weak and went to the trend line, didn't even bounce off it, it just broke it, which just goes to show, and it broke the previous support. So the next level we're looking at is right down here, which is 26.51. That's really decent support. If that goes, then we're going to go quite a bit lower, which I don't really want to see it go much lower than this. So I think we should be approaching the lows here. Now, it always feels a bit weird when you're buying in. I don't like to buy into a declining market. I always prefer to wait for the market to hit a low and then bounce to show that it's solid and there's strength there. But on Fibonacci levels and on good support levels, I would look to buy it with a very tight stop, hoping that the market will hold those levels. So it's really a very short-term strategy that can turn into a long-term strategy if the market holds. But you have to be flexible, because obviously if it breaks, you've got to get out. And I talked about air pocket levels, and this is one of them from last week. When it breaks it, the market just goes into an air pocket and drops really aggressively. So we got a question from James, and he asked a very good question actually about MATIC. And he said, is there a head and shoulders pattern in MATIC which has been forming since December? And that's a very interesting question, because I see this a lot when people are looking at technical patterns. A head and shoulders reversal pattern is, as the name says, it's a reversal of a trend. So it means it's the end of a trend. So usually the end of a trend is when the final buying, and there's a lot of aggressive buying, which completes the top, and then the market reverses. For me, this head and shoulders pattern, I can see what you're talking about. It's this left shoulder head, and this is the right shoulder. This is more part of a range as opposed to ending a trend. Now, it doesn't mean it won't go down. It possibly could. It's now broken this trend line, and it has been stronger than a lot of other markets. But I still think that this is broadly in an upward trend. And so therefore, I don't think this is a trend ending signal as you would call it in a normal head and shoulders reversal. I think the fact that it's this is generally moving higher in what I would describe as an ascending triangle. So I think this bigger picture chart, if I move it over to a weekly, you'll see what I mean. For it to be a significant pattern, it should show up on a weekly chart for me. Now, it does show that it's broken this line, but that's not particularly clear as a head and shoulders pattern on the weekly chart. So this is, for me, a big ascending triangle. It has broken this support line, which we can redraw because it can adjust its trend line. The broader market is weak, so it is pushing against the tide, as it were, swimming against the tide. So it's trying to hold up when everything's falling. So it's not surprising that this is correcting. So I think that this will go sideways. I think it will possibly go a bit lower to this 200-day moving average, and then it will range trade. Now, the other thing about patterns and how you trade, it's all down to your own personal style. So if you take a trade and you put a stop in and you're disciplined, then in some ways, it doesn't matter what the pattern is or whether somebody agrees. And you should always make your own mind up. It's a very good question, James. Thank you very much for asking that. And back to you, Manu. Any final thoughts from you?
No, I think that's it, really.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thanks so much for listening, and we will catch you next time.